Hello again, everyone. I was recently asked by a model flyer who competes at the very highest levels in scale competitions for help with programming a tri-motor model that he flies in competitions. Now, the first thing you think of is, well, in the basic settings of the model, simply select a 3-engine model and job done. And if all you wanted was throttle, that would be true. However, he has a couple of specific requirements which mean you can't do that, and there's a little bit of interesting programming to be done. First of all, he wants a bit of the rudder to throttle to help steer on the ground, so we need to be able to increase power on the left or the right engines, and a little bit of boost on the middle one as well. And also there is a maneuver in the scale competitions where you do a fly past in a multi-engine model with one of the engines throttled back. So he wants to be able to move a switch, it throttles back one of the engines and puts on a little bit of opposite rudder to help counter the yaw. And because the wind may be blowing from the left or right, and he always wants to do this in the wind, he needs to have this on a 3-position switch so he can switch between left motor or right motor being throttled back. Now, one of the challenges of this is that it is 4-stroke motors, not electric, so we need to have the throttle trim working on all 3 engines. And there is either a deliberate or a software bug that prevents us using the digital trim menu to add the inner and outer engines to the throttle trim. So we've found a way around that. So let's have a little look at what we do. We've got a normal model in all the settings, the basic properties. So it's just going to have 1 engine count there. What we've done in function assignment is create additional throttle left and throttle right. And as you can see, they are also assigned to the P4 stick. But in order to allow us to be able to trim those left and right throttles, we've added another one called throttle trim. No servo needs to be assigned to this. And its trim is trim 4, which you get by, if I clear it out here, going plus, digital trim, come to TR4, because I'm throttle left. If you were throttle right, you would select on it the other one, like TR2. Say OK, OK to that. And that gives us something to mix to those engines later on. So why don't we deal first with getting that trim working? Come to Finetuning, Free Mixes, come down here, and we've got throttle trim to the throttle left and throttle trim to the throttle right. If we have a look in them, we can see how they're set up. The master value is 50% because trims only work half travel values. The switch is the throttle switch, set up in a very specific way, because remember that with throttle trim, you only want it working when the throttle is back at idle, and you want it to have 0 effect when the stick's fully forward. So we've set it up like this. We've chosen P4 as the switch, center is switched off, so that we get just a 0 to 100%, and reverse is switched on. So with my throttle stick back, the mix switch is at fully on, and if I move the throttle forward, fully forward, the mix switch is at 0%, which is fully off, and it graduates all the way in between, which is how the digital throttle low trim works. So we say OK to that, and if we've done that for both of them, come out here, do that throttle trim, throttle left and to throttle right, and if we have a look at what that does to the servos, so servos 1, 5 and 6 are the 3 throttles, and if I move the throttle stick you can see they work. The throttle back at idle, if I press the throttle forward trim button, you can see all of them move up the same amount. I'll bring the throttle trim back and back beyond 100. So you can see, certainly with the throttle at idle, it's all working. I'll give it some amount of throttle trim forward. And now if I move the throttle stick forward, see throttle servo number 1 is the system generated throttle, so it will just go to a maximum of 100%. Hopefully servos 5 and 6 will also just go to a maximum of 100%. They do, and we can see that throughout the range. So we've proved that we've got the trim working properly on all 3 throttles. We'll bring that back to 100. Next, if we have a look in fine tuning at the free mixes, we've got 3 rudder mixes. So rudder to throttle left, so that when we push in right rudder, it brings the left hand throttle up a bit. Rudder to throttle right, so when we push left rudder, it brings the right hand throttle up a bit. And my chum wanted the center throttle to increase a little bit as well. So I've put it in there with some smaller value. You can choose whatever mixing value you want. Let's have a look at what mixing is done. Here we have, I've gone for a master value of 50%. It's switchable, so switch C in this case, a 2-position switch, switches it on or off. And very importantly is the curve. Let's take a look at the curve. It's that kind for this one. So that if I move the stick left, watch the little sight, the stick left does nothing. But if I push the stick to the right, it's going out there, we're getting the side of the curve that has the mixer increase. So as I push the rudder stick to the right, it's going to increase the mix. And since this is the throttle left curve, it will boost the left-hand engine. Okay. And we do the same thing for throttle right. It's just got the opposite version of the curve. And these, by the way, are pre-made curves in Jeti. If I open that up, there's how it would come in as normal in the mixer. So just change your curve type till you get the one you want. There we are. So now this is for the throttle on the right. So if I push this rudder stick to the left, you can see it's going in the curve where it'll have an effect. And if I push the stick right, it's on a flat bit of curve, it will have no effect. And it just needs a master value, in this case of minus 50%, to reverse the effect of that curve going downwards rather than upwards. Okay, on the same switch again. So let's have a look at the effect on the servos. My rudder is channel 4 here. It's having no effect because the mix is switched off. And if I switch the mix on at any throttle setting, what will happen now is if I push rudder to the right, then the center throttle will come up a bit and the left throttle will come up a bit more, but no effect on the right throttle. And if I move the throttle rudder to the left, again, center throttle comes up, left throttle doesn't increase, but the right throttle does. And finally, of those mixes, rudder to the center throttle, we need a V-shaped curve, of course, because in both cases we're going upwards. And again, it's a built-in curve. You could have selected the 3-position curve and manually moved position 1 up to the top there, but there's a built-in curve does it, so quite happy to take that. So that gives us the switched effect of the outer and middle engines revving up a little bit when you move the rudder stick. Okay, finally, what about the flybys? Well, what I've done is, rather than use mixing, I've gone to flight modes. It makes it easier because we can use flight mode separate rudder trimming during our setup stages to very quickly find how much rudder we want. So I've made 3 flight modes. Well, I've made 2. The throttle down left, throttle down right, and we'll accept the default mode as being just our normal flying mode. I've put a 1-second delay in all of them, just so that the throttling down and the throttling back up does not just slam. You know, model engines and carburetors would be quite happier with that gentle opening up. And I've put it on a 3-position switch so that I can switch to the left motor, back to no motor, and switch to the right motor, throttled down. OK to that. And we come to the digital trim. No, sorry. Yes, I'm getting myself all tied up. Digital trim. We come to rudder and set it to flight mode separate. And the reason for this is then in each of those 3 flight modes, we can put on a rudder trim and it will remember it just for that value. So if we've throttled down the right-hand engine, we can start using the rudder trim and adding left rudder trim until we get what we think is the right value. It's much easier than trying to use mixing and going back and forward several iterations trying to get it right. And we come to function curves. This is how I've decided to bring the throttles down. And again, for just throttle left and throttle right, I've made those flight modes separate. And then we go into the curve for each one. It will start off as a standard curve. And if I move to the throttle right switch position, it stays as standard. Middle position stays as standard. But when I go to the throttle left, what I've done is change it to a constant curve. And I've moved that down to some value. So just changed from the regular to a constant, come down here and change it to some value. Now you can get all this set up on the ground with the engine running. Just wind this down until you get the sort of low power setting that you want for that. And it will only happen when you switch to throttle left, because we're in the throttle left curve, it goes there. Watch that little curve symbol, it goes back to regular when I go to neutral or throttled down right. Meanwhile, throttle down right, we do exactly the same thing. As you come down here, you can see in there, when I've gone throttle down left, it's the regular curve. Center, it's neutral, but throttle down right, it's gone to the low value. And if we take a look then in what happens to the servos, so there we are, all 3 of them running at some value. I'm coming along and I want to do the throttle down left. So I move the switch to the throttle down left. You can see the left-hand throttle, servo 5, has come down to that fixed value. The other 2 throttles still work as required, but the trim has now gone to the preset trim value, which I can change just by using the trim buttons. Makes it very easy to set up during all your practice flights. If I come back to the center position, there's that nice 1 second transition of the throttle coming up and the trim going down. And if I switch to throttle down right mode, you can see the throttle on the right has come down to -75. The other 2 throttles work quite happily on the stick, and the trim on the rudder channel, channel 4, has come down to its value. So it's got some left trim in there. And again, it's independent to that flight mode, so we can switch between them and they've all got their own set values. And that's it.